Well, I suppose it's time I turn the camera on. It seems to be something everyone's talking about today in the sports world. And yeah, today's Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023. It is 8:27 p.m. Eastern Time. And 24 hours ago, I just finished watching, well, a couple of sporting events. New Year's Day per se is a holiday here in Canada, but since that happened on a weekend, Monday was a stat holiday here, so we got to stay home from work and watch 3 junior hockey games in the World Junior Championships and flip back and forth with 1, 2, 3 bowl games, and of course the Bills and the Bengals played an NFL game later that night. I was actually watching, I think it was a third period in overtime. Canada was ahead of the Slovaks, but blew the lead. Their goalie was amazing, and Canada ended up winning in overtime. And I missed most of the second half of the Rose Bowl because of that. And I also missed the beginning of the Bills-Cincinnati Bengals game. But by the time I turned over, the incident had already just happened. I saw delay, postponed. I'm like, okay, it's football. There must be lightning. And they sent the players back to the dressing room because of bad weather. And then the commentators, they go, I don't know, they must have been gone back and forth between the studio and the broadcasters in the stadium. And Susie Huber and Booger McFarlane were there, and just the way they were talking, I'm like, this is not a weather issue here. Something's really going on. So I actually backed up. I don't know what you call the feature on these fancy remotes, but I was able to back up the first hour and actually watch it and see what actually happened. And then it kind of all fell into place. It's interesting, I work in the field of police and the justice system. And there's a lot of crossover between the medical system and the justice system. Every day I'm either looking at a file or talking to someone. I used to be on the front lines, taking the call. And so somebody we get desensitized, I guess. And I guess that's what I found rather interesting to take note. I mean, like, it's funny, football players they get injured all the time. They get carted off the field, broken legs, torn ACLs. And here I am every day dealing with crime, which often includes people being injured, seriously injured, and in some cases murdered or killed or whatever. There's also a lot of medical calls that for some reason were involved or engaged. And it's just interesting how we react to injuries and or deaths of certain people in celebrity world. And I mean, this guy's not dead yet. He did, I think his heart's, they're trying to, I don't even know the difference, cardiac arrest versus heart attack. The guy's heart stopped beating, he collapsed, and they took him to the hospital, and he's in some sort of a, I'm not really sure, unconscious state, critical, stable, and I guess the heart's started again with CPR, and there's hope this guy will wake up when it's safe to do so. Only then will we find, I guess when your heart stops, it circulates blood throughout your body, including in your head. So the biggest concern right now is if you don't get the blood circulating into your head, you could have brain damage. So yeah, this is a pretty scary situation for this young player, Damar Hamlin. so unique. I mean, when I follow a sport like tennis, I get to know every player. Even smaller team sports like basketball and hockey, you get to know all the players on the teams that you like. And in the league, there's 53 players on each NFL roster, as well as at least another 50 on the practice squads. And any given play, you never know who's going to be on that field. I've been almost quasi-religiously following this sport for 30 years. And it's even tough for me to give you a name. The star players are the ones you see on the news, and you know who they are. You know who the quarterbacks are. You know who the top diva wide receivers are. You usually know the top running backs and the kickers and the coaches, but it's the linemen and the safeties. You just don't always hear. You don't know who these guys are. And it's good in a way. We've learned a lot about this guy and his story. And I get it. I guess the idea of somebody's heart stopped beating in a sporting event scares the hell out of people, just because it doesn't happen very often. And maybe I've been more desensitized to something like that than others, but I also want to take note that unfortunately the NFL's the sport it's 2023, and exactly 100 years ago to this, not today, but this year, which would be 1923, a football player in the college system, Iowa State Cyclones, had a player who was 21 years old essentially died on the field. And in this case, it wasn't a freak accident. It appears to be a deliberate, racist motivated attempt of violence. And I want to keep the focus on Damar Hamlin here in 2023, but I don't want us to forget who Jack Trice was in 1923. So I'm going to read you a little bit off the Wikipedia page here. Jack Trice was a football player and became the first African-American athlete for Iowa State College. He died due to injuries suffered during a college football game against the University of Minnesota. The game was on October 6th. He died October 8th. The stadium was subsequently named after him. Just bear with me here. I'm trying to sort this out. Yeah. Racism was a huge issue in college sports. And they actually had segregation in the school system. A lot of the black schools were in the southwest, or southeast states. They still exist today in some form. Not technically, but the SWAC and the MEEC are two conferences that are, quote, traditional black schools. So the University of Minnesota allegedly had players who were racist. They didn't like the fact that there was a black player on the Iowa State team. And allegedly there was a goal here to injure this player and get him out of the game. On October 6th, Trice and his Iowa State teammates played University in Minneapolis, so it was a road game. Trice got to stay in the same hotel, but he was not allowed to eat with them in the dining room. During the second play of the game, Trice's collarbone was broken. He insisted he was all right and returned to the game. In the third quarter, while attempting a tackle, he ended up on his back after a chop block and was trampled by 3 Minnesota players. Although he claimed to be fine, Trice was not able to stand and was removed from the game and sent to a hospital. The doctors did declare him fit to travel, and he returned to Iowa with his teammates. However, he died 2 days later due to hemorrhaging of the lungs and internal bleeding as a result. There's a great deal of speculation surrounding the play that resulted in Trice's death. Iowa State teammate Johnny B. Hem told the Cleveland Plain Dealer, "One person told me that nothing out of the ordinary happened, but another who saw it says it was murder." As a result of his death, Iowa State did not renew a contract to play against Minnesota for 66 years. In 1973, his legacy was renewed as a promotion began to name the Iowa State's new stadium after him. I guess there was some discussion and some arguing about it until they finally agreed to do it in 1984. Jack Trice Field, and a statue of him was erected in 1987. Then they named the stadium as well as the field. It was named after him in 1997. And as of right now, he's the only African American to have a football stadium named after him. Interestingly enough, he's believed to be the innovator of the shovel pass. How about that? Well, it's nice to know that we've come farther in 100 years. It's interesting that the world is still dealing with racism. There's homophobia and transphobia in this world, and it still creeps into sports. We've seen how Colin Kaepernick was blacklisted. We saw how Michael Sam was not accepted as a gay football player. Believe me, I've ran into it a few times in my attempts to be a out trans amateur athlete in athletics, specifically long distance running and swimming. It's interesting, I'm up here in Canada, and usually hockey's the sport we put on the pedestal. But for me, since 1993, it became football. I grew up in Toronto, and I grew up on Blue Jays baseball and Toronto Maple Leaf hockey. And after I graduated from high school, I made an ill-advised decision to go away to University of Western Ontario to attempt to take a science degree. Something I was perhaps talented enough to do, but didn't have the work ethic at the time. Not to mention the fact that I was a trans person who didn't even know I was trans, trying to fit in to an all-male dorm. I lived in this gigantic townhouse complex. I think there were 19 guys in there in total. 9 sets of 2, and then there was a single for the senior residential, I don't know what you call them, babysitter. And there were 3 members of, Canadian university football, perhaps nowhere near gets the, in terms of platform as the American, but 3 rookies from this team lived in my dorm, and 2 of them were my very next door neighbors, and it was them primarily, along with some of the other residents, who got me watching football, and I credit them with giving me the love, which is now 30 years that I'd say it's my number 1 sport. I watched every NFL game that's televised, and I watch as many college football games as I can that are televised, and a lot of games that are not televised are downloadable online, and likewise with some of the out-of-market NFL games. I will download tons of football games, and I won't necessarily watch them all from start to finish, but I'll download highlight packages, and I pay attention to every game. I've been doing this for close to 30 seasons. And it was interesting just to see the family atmosphere, I guess you could call it. After Buddy, Mr. Hamlin, went down, they stopped being football players and they went back to being humans. Didn't matter if you were on the Buffalo team or the Cincinnati team. Everyone was really shocked and concerned for what they saw. And everyone was just too distraught at what they'd seen. And I got no problem with the way it was all handled. It's not something that they've had to deal with in a while. 1997, there was a player that collapsed after a hit and became partially paralyzed. I think it goes back to 1971. I was watching Wilbon and Kornheiser tonight talking about athletes dying during the middle of a sporting event and how it's not something football has seen much of, if at all. Car racing, they talked about how it happens a lot. But yeah, I guess for me, I'm just trying to process everything I saw. And I guess it's just ironic that we would invent a sport that's so violent. I remember studying ancient history, ancient Rome history, where they didn't necessarily value human lives. The king of Rome or Italy or whoever they were would order, we're going to have events at the Roman Colosseum and we're literally going to watch people fight to the death for entertainment purposes. So at least we're not really doing that anymore. I know that there's violent fighting that goes on. I'm not a fan of MMA. I even stopped watching boxing a long time ago, but I guess what makes football unique is just the strategy behind it. It's like a game of chess. It's another reason I like watching curling is the strategy is just as big as a role as the execution of the physicality of the sporting event. And when you see 53 people, various walks of life, all come together and work so hard on these game plans, and there's a lot of stigma around the college athlete, how they take underwater basket weaving and get 18 tutors to write their exams for them, but that's not always the case. You got to be pretty bright to figure out a football scheme. And if you ever look at the wristbands, they were talking about that on one of the games. You got to know these plays, and when the quarterback calls out a number, ABC 1, 2, 3, you have to know exactly what play that is. And all 11 guys on one side they've got a job to do. And it's like you spend your time at work more than you do your own family sometimes. And it's funny for me, that was only 8 months I lived in that university dorm. But we were like one big family. And I remember at Christmas, one guy dropped out. And the fact that he wasn't coming back is something that shocked us all. And then at the end of the year, I found out I'd failed too many classes and I would not be continuing into the next year. It's like, oh my goodness, I might probably never see half of these people ever again. And it was tough just staying in touch. I took my life in a different direction, and I was down in London, Ontario. I moved back to Toronto, and yeah, I lost touch with a lot of those guys within a year, and I literally have not seen or heard from any of them in probably 29 years. It's sad, actually. But it's funny, I think about those 8 months every day of my life, and I think back to some of the antics and fun of living in a university res. But what comes back to me is that's where I discovered my interest in the sport of football, and since then I've traveled to, and there's nothing quite like a live football game in the US. CFL, sorry, just the atmosphere and the game, no. It's the US college and it's the NFL. I've been to many games in Buffalo. I see how passionate the fan base is. Been to a game in Detroit, Cleveland, all these. When you live in Toronto, those are the 3 closest towns. Working class cities, I guess. I've been to NFL games in Buffalo, Detroit, and Cleveland. Where else have I seen it? Philadelphia, Chicago. Been to the Pittsburgh Stadium, but didn't actually see a game there because it was not football season. But it's interesting. You listen to a lot of these stories about these players. Sure, some of them grew up with a silver spoon in their mouth, but a lot of them did not. A lot of them come from poverty and bad neighborhoods. And an opportunity to play sports is the only thing that keeps them out of trouble with the law, keeps them out of jail, and keeps them alive. Either you go into a gang and do drugs and get shot and murdered, or you go into sports, and if you're lucky, you'll get drafted into the pros and make millions. And you see how grateful these guys are. This guy, Damar Hamlin, was not what you call a star. He was a backup safety. Again, most people didn't even know who he was until after. But then you learn this guy he's got a family, he's got a charity, he gets toys for the poor children so they can have a Christmas present. It's like, my gosh, there's some amazing people behind the scenes doing some amazing stuff. And I know that there's been a lot of bad stories in football. There's definitely a lot of domestic violent stories that are very disturbing. But at the same time, to see the way these players have rallied and gotten together during what was a very difficult situation last night, it's nice to see that there's respect and dignity among fellow soldiers, fellow family members. I mean, to think that somebody would literally kill Jack Trice 100 years ago by, I don't know what said, trampled, if they stepped on the guy's... Sounds like he was down and 2 or 3 guys stepped on the guy's friggin' chest and punctured his lung. And it's sad that something like that had to happen 100 years ago. I have been to Ames, Iowa, interestingly enough. Again, it was not during football season, but I got to go on the campus, and it was during the summer. I think there was actually practices and tryouts going on for all the fall sports. I was actually in town to take on a concert, but just being in a college town, it's just so cool. Everybody's young and excited and optimistic about their future, having a good time. And when was that now? That would have been 2002. It's like, wow, this is home of the Iowa State Cyclones. And I don't think I got in to see the football field, but still, throughout my travels, just to go into these, even when the stadiums are not functioning. I mean, I've taken driving trips all over the United States, and I've managed to, whenever I'm anywhere near a city that has a big stadium, I pull off and I go and I see if I can get into the stadium and get my picture taken, even in the empty stadium. I've been inside the swamp in Gainesville, Florida. I was inside Tallahassee for Florida State. I got inside Tennessee Stadium there in Knoxville. A friend of mine, I don't remember this, but we snuck a football inside, and we actually played catch on the turf in Knoxville. I don't remember that, but if he does, then we did. Yeah, it's strange. But it's interesting. The people on the television product is amazing, and I think that's what draws me to it as well. The sense of family and the sense of community. And my life's been rough, and I sometimes feel like most of my family and friends have either drifted apart or disappeared on me. And it doesn't matter which are the football, whether it's the NBC, the CBS, the Fox, the ESPN crews, even NFL Network. It's like these are people you see and hear every fall, and when this football season ends in January and you wait 7 months and you start hearing those voices again, you just get so fired up and excited. And yeah, I don't know what I can add to the story. Thoughts and prayers isn't really part of my vocabulary. I'm very kind of on the fence with the concept of religion. And as a member of the trans community, there's a lot of religious leaders who try to twist Christianity into trans hating, and that's another reason why I perhaps have problems with this whole concept. You hate to hear of a 24-year-old athlete in the prime of their career who does a lot of great charity work. You hate to think that this guy could be dead and that he's lying unconscious in critical condition in an ICU right now. What happens. I hope he makes a recovery. It sounds like the chances of his recovery are pretty good because they were there right away doing the CPR, and I guess the doctors. Healthcare system. When you're a professional football team with millions of dollars, you can get the best doctors in any city in the world. So I'm sure they're doing everything they can for Damar Hamlin, and but yeah, this as a fan of sports, I never played football, but I feel quite close to it. And while I'm not in the fraternity per se, I'm perhaps an extended family member of the sport. I'm one of very few Newfoundlanders out here, way in northeast Canada. Little island that's about halfway from New York City to the North Pole. We like our winter sports up here, but yeah, there's a few of us here, and one of them is me, who watches the NFL every Sunday, and at least during football season. A lot of fond memories and a lot of good people I've met over the years at football games or through football-related online chats, groups, whatevers, and yeah, just for what it's worth, thinking about y'all there, Bills, Bengals, fans, as well as members of the team and their families, and anyone else here in the trans community that might be a little bit, I don't know what we're feeling. So again, I talk about how we've got people dying every day in these wars, and nobody even knows it's happening. We don't mention it. But a football player collapses, all of a sudden the whole world is like in shock. They say it puts things into perspective. Life is more important than a football game, but why can't we value all lives equally? I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. I'm glad we're worried about the well-being of Damar Hamlin, but what about Jack Trice? Who was there for him? Anyway, let's as I get older, I'm big on history, and I think that's something I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be putting videos out there, whether people listen to me or not now. Maybe someone will discover me 20 years, 30 years, 50 years and say, that McCreath had some great stuff up there. Jack Trice, if your family's out there watching this, there's people here today, 100 years later, who are affected by his story and want to remember him just as much as, and pay tribute to him just as much as we do to athletes of today and current events. So yeah, Damar Hamlin, Jack Trice, I don't know why. One of the first things I thought of when I turned that TV on last night and saw Damar Hamlin being wheeled into a ambulance. It was Jack Trice and what happened to him. I don't know. It's a violent sport. Should we even be playing it? I don't know. They've been playing it for 130 years at least. Could be worse, I guess. But yeah, I think I'll turn the camera off now and get myself to bed, because dealing with a nasty sore throat again, and negative COVID test, which is good, but not feeling too good. So yeah, hope you enjoyed the video, and I don't know what else to say. Thanks for watching, everyone.